Good evening, everybody. This is Leslie Brown at Piedmont Wellness Center, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this evening. And we're going to be covering the MTHFR gene mutation and kind of discuss that, and we'll have an opportunity for questions as we go through the program. And I'd like to just point out that we are offering a special at the clinic that if you are not currently a patient and would like to be a patient at Piedmont Wellness Center, we're offering 50% off the initial visit. So that's a savings of $75. So I think you'll see on your screen there's a way to register for that if you're interested, and that offer will be through 8 o'clock tonight. So we're going to go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about this evening is listed here. We're going to talk about what is the MTHFR gene mutation, how is this mutation diagnosed. We're going to talk about how it affects the body and what conditions are associated with this mutation. We're going to talk about treatment that's available for it, and probably most importantly, we're going to talk about what you can do if you have the mutation to affect your health and to live as healthy as possible. So first off, before we move on, I'm just going to mention that the Human Genome Project was complete in 2003. And through that research, they discovered that there are 20,000 to 25,000 human genes. And they initially thought there were over 100,000, but that's sort of been whittled down to this 20 to 25,000. And so we're going to be talking about one of those 20 to 25,000 genes. And we're also going to be talking about enzymes. And in the human body, there are over 50,000 enzymes. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're going to be focusing in on one enzyme as well. So first of all, let's talk about what is this MTHFR gene mutation. The MTHFR stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. The name of the gene is also the name of the enzyme, so that either makes it simple or more confusing. It just depends. What does this enzyme do? The MTHFR enzyme breaks down folate vitamins from an inactive form called the 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate to the active form, which is the 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, the active form of folate. The active form helps convert the amino acid homocysteine in your body into the amino acid methionine and eventually into the substance called SAMe, or S-adenosyl methionine. And these are all necessary substances within the body, and they play a certain role. Methionine is used by the body to make proteins. It helps the body to utilize antioxidants. It helps the liver in processing fats. It helps in the production of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and melatonin. So these substances are very important in the body and play a certain role. This is a diagram that shows various pathways that are affected with the MTHFR mutation. And you'll see the X's that are here point out areas where there's going to be some impairment in conversion to certain substances. And it shows here that starting with the diet, there's an intake of folic acid, and then various pathways are activated. And again, a reminder that we're talking about one enzyme in roughly over 50,000 enzymes that are found within the human body. So we're going to continue here. What is this mutation? There are 40 to 50 mutations that are associated with this particular gene. But what they have found through research is that there are two that are particularly problematic. And they're labeled as the 677 and the 1298. The number of these mutations refer to their location on the DNA. One gene is inherited from the mother and one from the father, as is the case with all genes that we have as human beings. Not to get complicated, but if you have a homozygous mutation, that means that both copies of the gene are mutated, and that can be either in the 677 or the 1298. If you have a heterozygous copy, that means you have one mutated copy of either the 677 or the 1298, and the other arm of that gene is going to be normal. And then a compound heterozygous is that one is you have two mutated copies, but they're different. One is the 677 and one will be the 1298. So you've inherited one mutated copy from each parent. A variant of the mutated MTHFR gene will have several effects within the body, but it mostly is a mutated or a defective enzyme. So the function of the enzyme is going to be less than 100%. So it affects the descending enzyme pathways as well. So when we're talking about the homozygous, which is a double copy, you will have about 70% reduction of normal MTHFR enzyme activity. So it's 70% less than 100%, so essentially 30% ability of that cell to perform its function. With a heterozygous, either a single copy of the 677 or the 1298, there is about a 40% reduction of normal MTHFR enzyme activity, or about a 60% function ability, essentially. So there will be some variation in symptoms that are presented or treatment that is recommended. The majority of the research done on this particular gene, it has been focused on the 677, and a little bit less is known about the 1298. However, typically we're going to approach that treatment very similar with some modifications based on someone's particular mutation. So how is this mutation diagnosed? Because this gene mutation has probably been known roughly since at the end of the Human Genome Project, took a couple of years for this clinically to be recognized in standard practice. The test is now pretty readily available through LabCorp, through Quest, and through Solstice Labs. At Piedmont Wellness Center, we're generally using the test that's available through LabCorp. There is another mail order test that you can access as a layperson called 23andMe. This is a saliva test kit that will come to you by mail, and you simply send in a sample of saliva, and it tests not only for the MTHFR, but several, basically your whole genetic picture, ancestry, numerous things are included in that test, and it's very cost effective for $99. So that is another way that you can access that information. So the question is always, is everybody tested? Well, that's not quite the case, or nor should it be. And 40% of the worldwide population has a variation of this mutation, but not everybody has to be tested. In particular, those that have personal or family histories of heart disease, stroke, miscarriages, depression, neurological disorders, alcoholism, various cancers, those kind of histories warrant testing. In addition, when I'm working with young women that are in the stages of family planning, it's very important to test for this mutation because it does affect how prenatal care and some of the supplementation recommendations. So it's a simple test to have done. It's done once in a lifetime because, of course, it never changes, but that is something that we do pretty commonly here. So the big question is, what does this gene mutation do? How does it affect the body, and what conditions are associated with it? One thing I want to point out is that this gene mutation is not known to cause any particular disorder, but it is known to make those conditions much more likely. So it has an associated effect versus a causative effect. So first of all, the impaired MTHFR enzyme activity has a negative effect on DNA synthesis and repair, which means that new cells that are being made in the body can be altered because of the defective enzyme. It also can affect embryonic development in utero, and it will affect neurotransmitter synthesis, meaning an impaired ability to make serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, melatonin. And then it's a risk factor, or it increases the risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So it all has to do with how this enzyme is able to function. Impaired enzyme activity does not allow for the breakdown of folate. which will often result in a high homocysteine level. And a high homocysteine is known to be an associated risk for arteriosclerotic vascular disease or venous thrombosis, which is essentially blood clots. And it also increases the risk for various dementias. Homocysteine is, again, a substance in the body associated with vitamin B12 and with the enzyme mutation. And homocysteine needs to be converted to other substances. But with this mutation, there's poor conversion to glutathione. Glutathione is known as the master antioxidant in the body. And without this adequate antioxidant, cells are much more susceptible to stress, to toxic buildup, and to things that we're exposed to on a daily basis: heavy metals, viruses, bacteria, to mold, to chemicals, all of those sorts of things. And so the cell essentially can't detoxify as efficiently. Homocysteine is then poorly converted to methionine, and without adequate methionine, there is a much greater risk for the arteriosclerosis, for fatty liver disease, for various anemias. Inflammation is much more prevalent, and there's increased free radical damage. So essentially what's happening at this point is we're having a lot of effect on a cellular level in terms of the body being able to make substances it needs and to get rid of substances that it doesn't need. So to continue here, if there's less methionine available, then there's less SAMe, and SAMe is a known component when it comes to neurological disorders, and there's a much, much greater risk of depression, including bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, numerous neurological problems. And MTHFR increases the risk of certain cancers, and in particular, it's associated with an increase in breast and prostate cancer. And then there are numerous conditions that will be found, again, associated with this condition, including stroke, congenital defects, irritable bowel syndrome, miscarriages, migraines, chemical sensitivities, addictions, including drug and alcohol, autism, infertility, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, spina bifida, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, ADHD, ADD, and vascular dementia, and numerous other ones are associated, but that sort of gives you a broad picture. So sort of in a quick summary, if you look at the MTHFR enzyme deficiency, what happens is that your cells cannot properly convert and utilize the inactive form of folate and B12 to the active forms, and that impairs the cascade of enzyme reactions that occur continuously in every cell in the body. So this enzyme deficiency essentially affects every cell in your body and its ability to function. So let's talk about treatment. The first thing when it comes to treatment is that when people are diagnosed, they've had this gene mutation their whole life and may never have known that. And a defective gene, at least in this time in history, can't be changed. But there are many things that can be done to help facilitate its function, to optimize the function of the enzyme, and to minimize potential damage and the associated conditions. Treatment is determined by which type of mutated variant you have, along with consideration for personal and family medical history and current medical problems. So the gene mutation by itself has to be considered in light of what's going on with you currently, and by history and by family history. And it's important to note that before certain other types of treatments that may be needed, that the methylation pathways have to be addressed before treatment can begin for things like chelation, for Lyme disease, for mold toxicity. Because if these pathways of detoxification aren't open, then treatment can actually cause more problems, more side effects, and not be as effective as it could be. So the treatment will include methylated forms of B12 and folate, along with the cofactor vitamin B6, and doses again are determined by the variant and the symptoms that the person is experiencing. If treatment is started too quickly or it's too aggressive, then the process of methylation occurs too quickly, and side effects such as fatigue, muscle aches, headaches, nausea, numerous things can make you feel worse actually before you get better. So we taper that frequently at the rate that you can handle, essentially. Too much too soon is not a good idea. So in addition to kind of the basic B12, folic acid, and B6 that we'll start with, there are several other nutrient recommendations to help aid in this enzymatic process. Nattokinase and beta-aspirin are examples of things that can help keep the blood thin and prevent clot formation. The 677 variant is associated with a higher rate of forming blood clots or with stroke or blood clotting, and so often, depending again on the combination of the mutation, certain blood thinning components are needed. And then also vitamin C is often recommended. Vitamin C helps to reduce free radical damage and to reduce levels of copper. And then other nutrients such as the trimethylglycine, TMG, riboflavin, curcumin, milk thistle, omega-3 and 6 fats, vitamin D, IV glutathione is also available, and then probiotics may be recommended. All of these additional things are determined by your provider who's familiar with MTHFR in order to appropriately add things in the order that your body's going to need them. And then there are certain monitoring that needs to go on with the MTHFR mutation. It's important to monitor your folate and B12 levels, and there are a couple of ways that that can be done. Ferritin levels and copper and zinc are also going to be monitored periodically. Inflammatory markers, homocysteine levels are important to keep an eye on. Hopefully those things are going to be improving as treatment is undertaken. And then it can help in guiding what kind of adjustments need to be made in dosing. And just for your information there, if copper levels are high, then you can see low ferritin and low zinc levels, where it can help interpret some of the common lab tests that are done so that we're not addressing a low ferritin if we don't first address a high copper, and the same with the zinc. So that gives somewhat of an idea of some nutrients that are used for the MTHFR mutation. And very importantly, it's important to know what you can do to help improve your health in light of this gene mutation. And again, it can't go away, but there's a lot of things you have control over. And so in addition to some nutrients or supplementation, there are several lifestyle habits that you can employ that support the methylation pathways and aid in prevention of disease and conditions that are associated with the mutation. One of the first recommendations is to avoid or limit foods that are fortified with synthetic forms of folic acid and common forms of B12. That's the cyanocobalamin. So fortified foods in general will include grain foods, breads, cereals, junk foods, processed foods. They'll all have added synthetic vitamins, sometimes in the name of making it healthy or sometimes to put back what's been stripped away from that. But anyone with this gene mutation just does not process and handle those synthetic versions of these vitamins, and so it's recommended to avoid the food. In addition, you want to avoid supplements that include the synthetic form. So that has an effect on the choice of a prenatal vitamin or a multivitamin, energy drinks, things like that. So you got to look at labels and really know what you're putting into your body. Secondly, it's very important to avoid folic acid and B12 blocking drugs. Birth controls will block that. Methotrexate, which is often used in autoimmune or situations of cancer, and then antacids. All of these will block your absorption of folic acid and B12, just simply adding to the problem of the inability to use those vitamins in the enzymatic pathway. And then avoid chemicals that raise homocysteine. Commonly, nitrous oxide that's used in dentistry will also raise homocysteine. If that's already a problem because of the mutation, then you can reach dangerous levels of homocysteine, putting yourself at risk for cardiovascular events. So it's important to avoid that additional stress. It's recommended to reduce dairy. Dairy is not hugely needed in the diet anyway, and if you do use dairy, then goat milk is a little less offensive in this enzyme pathway. Methods of detox are also really important, such as an infrared sauna, using Epsom salts, baking soda baths that help the skin to release toxins, and methods that increase sweating. So those are some ways that you can also enhance detoxification. And it's very, in particularly important to avoid alcohol with this mutation, particularly a double copy of the 677, because that increases the demand for methylation and for the body's ability to detoxify. So this is not a comprehensive list of what's recommended, but these are some of the highlights, and there are several resources that will kind of give you even further things that you can address in your lifestyle to enhance your health. But between supplementation and then some lifestyle changes, you can expect to achieve a pretty good quality of life and avoid, prevention being the goal, avoid some of the associated conditions. And I will mention that with typical treatment, if symptoms don't improve or clinically things don't seem to be looking better, it is recommended to do some further genetic testing. Often the MTHFR mutation is associated by some other mutations, and those can be looked at through various methods of testing. They're not as commonly done through our common labs, but there are other testing methods that may be recommended. So let's see here. We're going to continue here with what else can you do. Eating the cleanest diet that you can afford, grass-fed, free-range, hormone-free, organic meats and fish and eggs is going to be a very important part of your diet. Avoiding excessive chemical exposure from personal care products, home cleaning products, and lawn care products. These types of things that you're exposed to externally can be very, very difficult on a cellular level for the body to detoxify, and it only complicates the picture with the MTHFR mutation. It is recommended to consider removing the mercury amalgams and root canals by trained dentists. This can be a very expensive venture, and so you want to consider that carefully, but there is some benefit to getting the heavy metals out of the body if you can afford to do that. Using an air purifier at home and work, again, keeps the air that you're breathing, taking into the body, much cleaner and less contaminated. Very important to inform family members of the mutation and have your children tested should you test positive for this. This is an inherited mutation, and if you have the mutation, 1 or 2 copies, there's a likelihood your children will have that, and so again, it's just important in terms of prevention. If you're pregnant or considering pregnancy, very important to seek an OBGYN or a midwife that is knowledgeable with this mutation. Prenatal care may need to be adjusted, and there are certain things recommended that wouldn't otherwise be recommended. So again, very important, and it's one of the reasons that we will frequently test young women who are considering pregnancy. And then very important too is adding supplements one at a time to avoid rapid methylation and unnecessary side effects. And that's something that we do somewhat stepwise, and add a few things and then continue to add to the regimen. So at this point, we're going to field some questions. So if I will check to see here if we have any questions at this point. Should they be here? Am I doing it right? I'm learning how to pull up questions here.
If you have any questions, go to the chat tab on your sidebar, and you can type any questions that you have for Leslie there. You can also take advantage of the half off your initial consultation special if you go into the Pop-ins tab as well on your sidebar.
One of the things, I'll just sort of conclude, and then we can come back to some of the questions. Just to keep in mind that although this mutation is common, it is one gene out of obviously thousands that we have, and it's affecting one enzyme out of thousands that we have. So it may not be the complete answer to some of the questions health-wise, but we know enough at this point that it can make a significant difference in your treatment. And again, we test very frequently for this mutation and offer individualized treatment plans to improve your health and help to prevent these conditions and hopefully help you achieve much more optimal health. You'll see the number on the screen. That's the number for our office if you would like to make a phone call and have a free consultation or schedule an appointment. Please feel free to do that. And let's see here. Okay, let's talk about a question we have of whether or not this mutation affects the thyroid. There's not a direct known effect directly to the thyroid. However, given that because it affects every cell in the body and all of the enzyme processes that occur in each cell, that could ultimately be affecting the thyroid. So indirectly, yes, and directly, no. But it is something that if we're looking to balance thyroid function, we will certainly address the mutation as well. So I hope that answers that question. Jennifer asked, will giving blood help this condition? No, it does not change the gene mutation. It doesn't change the enzyme. If there are other conditions, such as a high ferritin, high blood count for other reasons, we recommend blood donating all the time. But directly with this mutation, it's not beneficial. Okay, will the slide deck be made available? Yes, Keith, we will make that available on our website, so you should be able to hopefully print that off. All right, another question. Can parents carry the mutation but not have the condition? Well, that's a good question. If you have the mutation, you essentially have the condition of the mutation. You may not have any symptoms. You may not have any diagnosed conditions that are associated with it. So really what you're asking is, even if I have the mutation, does it have to be expressed? And the answer to that is no. Mutations require an environment that expresses associated symptoms or diseases. So by eating a clean diet, by living in a toxin-free environment, by optimizing your health already, though you may never know that you've had this mutation, and so it may be found accidentally. So if that answers the question, there are populations of people around the world that live in much more pristine environments and where the mutation is common, but they're not the associated conditions. In America, we're a little bit different. We can see that much sicker people that are younger with the mutation because they're exposed so much earlier to things that will cause this to be expressed more readily. So I hope that makes that clear at least a little bit. And if parents have the mutation, if it depends on if it's one or two copies, at least one will potentially be transferred to kids. So it's important from that standpoint of prevention to know whether or not children have the mutation as well. So let's see, if there's any other questions, I'll be glad to answer those. You mentioned opening the pathways first if you have Lyme disease. Can you? Yes, I can explain that. Lyme is tricky, as anybody who has Lyme disease knows, and so in order for treatment to be effective and for the body to be able to rid itself of some of the toxins that are produced by the Lyme bacteria, basically, and to deal with the treatment in terms of antibiotics and nutrients, the cellular pathway of detoxification has to be opened up. So you could undergo treatment with less benefit if this mutation is not addressed first. And so that's pretty common for us to do that here in the office, just to make sure we're getting the best benefit of treatment when it comes to Lyme, and in particular mold treatment as well. So it's all about how those cells are able to detoxify on a very small level, not just detoxification through the liver or the kidneys or the skin, but through on a cellular level as well. Okay, any other questions for anybody? From, let's see, this point, if there are any further questions that occur to you, please feel free to email that to us, and I'll be glad to answer those. after this, whenever you have a question about this. Hopefully you can access this PowerPoint if it's helpful to refer to. We'd be glad to work with you in whatever way you need, so please feel free to contact our office. And hope everyone has learned something tonight, and you'll have a good evening.